Okay, so what I've got going today is a bit of a mini build on the jaw pistons. This is obviously just the resin cast piece, and as you can see it's not terribly good because it's fairly one-sided. It's obviously only been poured flat into a mould rather than actually into a two-part mould, which means the shape that's supposed to be in it hasn't been continued around to that side at all. That'd be fine if you were just doing a piece like that where that inside part was never seen, sort of thing, but for what I'm doing, I want to make the parts as realistic as possible, as I've done with most of them. So I want them to be able to move, and I want the pistons to be able to shift around and that sort of stuff as well. So again, not a big deal with the jaw because there's not a hell of a lot of movement actually in it, but it'd be nice to actually have the mouth in an open or closed position if I decide I want to for a particular sort of setup. I'll show you in just a second how I've managed to get some of the shaping done in this. I've just made up a custom tool. I get the biggest points of interest in terms of what I'm using is because I'm using aluminium. I was lucky enough to come across an idea of using these, which is they're aluminium, but they're actually knitting needles. And they're solid, and they happen to be the right sort of gauge that I need for the thickness of them. And I've worked out a way that I can actually taper them down in particular spots to give the look that I'm actually after. I've got my little bench grinder here, and I've basically jerry-rigged up a pulley system. This is actually off a fan belt or timing belt off a car sort of thing that happens to be one of the aluminium bits that I collected for melting down, and it was such a good pulley system I thought I'll keep that in case I need it. And I've basically just set it up so that it's sprung loaded to the side of the bench and held in place. And the reason why I've done that sort of thing is because I wanted to make up a little belt drive system that allows me to actually do custom sanding for these smaller pieces, so that I can actually get inside there. The other thing you'll notice here is that I've got it set up in such a way that the belt can be actually turned inside out. So the idea behind that is that I can turn it in that way and have it tensioned on that way to get the details sanded in that way. Or depending on the tension that I want to do, I can actually do it the other way around. Turn that belt inside out, and then that way I can actually, when that's spinning, I can actually see the underside of it in terms of the alignment, so that I can actually make sure that it matches up. The other reason why this is because it's as a custom setup, it means that I can go through different sort of belt sizes, which is something that I probably wouldn't have been able to do if it was just an off-the-shelf sort of thing. So a quick little jerry-rig setup like that, and it works great for what I want to do. Yeah, that's it for there. Okay, the varying gauges of aluminium that I'm actually using to make these are a little hard to come by. The thickness like this knitting needle and the other little bits that I've got is these. They're not a standard size, and what I've been able to do is buy some cheap sort of $2 shop wind chime sort of things, and then pull them to pieces for the actual aluminium components that I need. That's another thickness there. You can see the hole where the string used to go through for it to be a wind chime. And then there's some other stuff that's a very, very thin walled aluminium stuff, and again that was a wind chime as well. And it's just by finding these sort of odd sizes as I walk around from place to place and spot bits and pieces that I can see particular uses for them. This thin wall stuff, I'll demonstrate for you how I've actually managed to make use of that to actually get the little hinging piece that I've got there. Okay, so the piece that I'm working on is this little out to the side piece. I don't know, it might be a little bit better. It's a little bit better seen in that bit there. And it's essentially this small piece that comes off to the side, which is quite hard to replicate if you're trying to get a thin piece of metal or something to actually weld or solder that into position in that place. It'd be quite difficult to do. So the way I've got around it is to use some of this really thin wall stuff. This is the thicker stuff. That's your standard off-the-shelf type stuff. And this is the thinner wind chime stuff, okay, that I've managed to find. And effectively what I do is I just get the piece that I want to actually size it to, and I put it over there like that. Okay, and then using a pair of pliers, I crimp that in such a way that it pulls around the piece of tube. And squashes flat like that. Okay, and that both creates the shape that I need to match around that edge, and it gives me that outer piece. That actually crimps on there pretty tight. That would actually be good enough on its own, sort of thing, but I'll actually add some bits. And the fact that it's got a little bit of sideways movement is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of being able to position it. And then obviously that needs to be cleaned up and fixed up a little bit better, but that's essentially how it works. I'll then drill a small hole through there so that that's hinged properly. Okay, and that's essentially how I've created that piece. So the next piece I'm working on is this shape that we have in here, which is the actual piston control bit, if there was such a thing. And what I'm going to build it off is this piece. I've had that from, this is left over from one of the finger pieces in the casting. That was one of the spares I've made, and I'm modifying the shape of this to actually achieve what I'm after. So I'll do that now, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so for any of you guys that have been watching these videos, you'd know that I don't have anything in the way of specialised milling machinery or a metalwork lathe and that sort of stuff. So I'll show you how I'm able to achieve some of the details that would otherwise need a lathe. You can see what I've got there in terms of the actual piece. Now that resin bit's a bit blown out there because of the light, but I think you can see it fairly well in the aluminium. And effectively what I'm doing is actually using my bandsaw here, which the blade thickness or the cut thickness of it is roughly the same thickness as the piece, or the gap, if you like, in the resin. So essentially what I do is I hold the piece there, and then using this little line that's actually cut into for putting in a new blade, that allows me to hold it in position on that, and then I gently and very gingerly sort of rotate the piece of metal around like that, just to achieve that cut depth that I want to get the line detail that I'm looking at there. And then once that's polished up, it'll be pretty good. So I've got another step to do to step down in terms of size, and then taper that a little bit to match that shape. Okay, but that's getting pretty close. And that's how I do it. Okay, so they're the finished pieces now waiting to be polished. You can see the assembly goes kind of like that and like that. They're longer than they need to be because I want to actually make sure that they have movement inside the skull. But apart from that, that's basically it. So I'm going to assemble these and polish them now and show you what they look like. Okay, so there we have an assembled one with the hinging mechanisms in place. Both there and there. Now the way I've done that is by doing a 1.5mm hole, so quite small in the end there, matching up to the corresponding piece, which lines up. I then have a 1.6 stainless steel wire, which I actually sand to taper, and then assemble those, which means that as it goes on, it stretches the hole a little bit because the tapering that I've done is sanded in such a way that it leaves a rough edge. So the rough edge actually smooths out the hole a little bit and is enough that it'll slide on. Once that's done, I cut it off either side just a little bit on a very slight angle, and then hammer the ends over to create a rivet type end, which creates a permanent hinge because the pin then can't drop out. That's essentially it. Okay, so there we have the finished piece. It hinges quite nicely, which is what we're after. And now that it's nicely shined up, it gives us the look we're after.